Hi, this is Philip Roberts vlogging for my Game Designers Cultural Practice class, and this vlog is on Papers, Please. The game takes place in a fictional Eastern Bloc country during the time of the dissolution of the USSR. The game has you playing as a customs agent during this tense time, and reinforces this feeling through its visual, sonic, interaction design, narrative design, and mechanics. Visually, the game is dark and grimy, with many browns and, well, more browns and a little bit of blacks and shades of gray thrown into. It certainly conveys the aesthetics and the dark, brutal efficiency of the formerly communist nations. The close-up of showing the booth, as well as the overview of the line and checkpoint, is particularly intriguing for the gameplay. In your booth, you have a close-up view of your documents and the person who is trying to go through the checkpoint. While you're struggling with this task, other actions, particularly terrorist attacks, may be taking place as someone attempts to jump the checkpoint. The audio design is particularly interesting and reinforces some of the ideas behind the gameplay. The audio design is very plotting with a polka beat and what you would stereotypically expect from an Eastern Bloc country. What's interesting is all the spoken dialogue is conveyed through an indistinct garble. This means that what is being said, at least from an audio standpoint, has little to no effect on your gameplay. What you have to is actually focus on the textual content in front of you. I grew to particularly disdain the sound of the ticker as it spat out a warning or penalty for letting someone through that I shouldn't. The interactions of Papers, Please are particularly important and have far-reaching consequences, especially in a narrative sense, as the amount of money you make each day is tied to the number of people that you're able to successfully get through without penalty. You're constantly struggling to let in as many as possible without making a mistake. Fail to do so, and your family might go cold and hungry, and eventually, if you fail to continue to feed them, they may die. This is one of the many ways you can lose the game. However, even doing the supposedly right thing may have consequences. Do you choose to let in a sex trafficker pursuing a woman that you let in before? If you do, you'll see in the papers next day that the woman has been found dead. However, by denying him, you will receive a penalty and a mark on your record, and you won't get the money that you need to feed your own family. You can choose to either help or work against the mysterious Ezek. However, you may find yourself on the wrong end of a revolution or a government firing squad. This all flows very well into the narrative of Papers, Please. The story plays out in several ways. The newspaper you see every day reminds you of both major and minor events that may have been affected by your decisions, or the political conditions at the time may affect a certain task that you have to perform, adding challenge. In the booth, dialogue from the people passing through will key you into more of the narrative. You may be dealing with the shenanigans of Yorji, completing tasks for Ezek operatives, or working with your supervisors or the inspector to quash the rebels. All of this comes together in the 20 different endings that are possible. Some are simple fail states, such as performing poorly at your job and getting fired, or letting your family starve. Other endings are the consequences of the various choices you took during the game. The mechanics are fairly simple, as in that they are complicated as they need to be, and are designed in such a way to reinforce the feeling of being a customs agent. You perform almost all your actions that you need to do using mouse clicks and movements, from grabbing documents to stamping papers, to pulling the lever to detain someone, or clicking on the loudspeakers to call next. All of this together can actually become quite difficult. The game starts out simply enough with you simply reading and inspecting documents and choosing to stamp yes or no. You must observe it for any inaccuracies, and if there are any discrepancies, then deny the person. However, this gets harder and harder as different requirements and documents are piled on and further piled on and piled on. Considering that you get paid for the more people you successfully let through, I found myself under considerable stress to perform. It can also be emotionally difficult to play as well. Like everything in Papers, Please, there are many shades of grades to your choices, and no right answers. I think this makes the game fairly engaging in several aspects. There's the mechanical aspect of mastering the game and performing as quickly as possible to get a good ending, so that your family stays well fed and you can pay for their escape. However, there's also a narrative aspect where you can play through the various situations and branches to see how the different story endings come about. All these come together in what is, my opinion, a very strong experience. In response to our readings, especially for Strategic Ambiguity by Christian Aum, he introduces the idea of ludonarrative dissonance, where the mechanics and interactions of gameplay subverts or contradicts the narrative. Aum's thesis is that Papers, Please succeeds in avoiding ludonarrative dissonance by what he calls player-side emergence. Essentially what his argument boils down to is by presenting only factual information and very sparse information at that, the player is left to externalize the various people interactions in Papers, Please. When you see that you're spending your money on rent, food, and heat on a wife, a son, a mother-in-law, and an uncle, because all you see is just text and a status condition, you're forced at a psychological level to put your uncle, your son, your wife, your mother-in-law in those positions. Therefore, you have to make the moral choice of what happens to them, and it's based upon your own value judgments. Essentially, what makes Papers, Please effective is that it doesn't preach to you or tell you what the value judgments are. You have to make them your own, and that puts the entire weight of such decisions on yourself. I agree with Aum in that this is why the Renegade Paragon system, or rather binary good and bad systems, often fall flat, such as in Mass Effect. It's funny because in a lot of newer fields, such as ludology or HCI, which I come from, there's a tendency to quote-unquote rediscover things that already have been explained or discovered before. In this case, I would argue that Papers, Please is not really emergent in the sense that it is a very well and finely crafted story, and all the interactions, for what they are, do not vary at all in any way. The faces of the people going through will change, but overall you will receive the same pieces of narrative that will play out in the same way at the same times every day. This is not emergent in the original sense of the word, and certainly not from a gameplay perspective. What Papers, Please does so well, though, is play with the concepts of internalization and externalization in the Freudian sense. By giving us so little in the interface and narrative, Papers, Please forces us to imagine what these scenarios really are fully like. Thus, we put ourselves and our experiences into these situations. And then, by not telling us what the value judgment is, but watching events play out and seeing how they affect us personally now that we have externalized, we now internalize the events and make our own value judgments. It's much weaker to say, oh my gosh, terrorism is bad for this reason, than to have the player imagine, oh no, I'm a security guard and someone just blew themselves up mere yards away from me. Or literally, how do I feed my family tonight? By subconsciously making the player place themselves in those situations, it makes what narrative there is that much more powerful.